So you've seen the title, you now see these graphs, and you're probably wondering, what am I even talking about? Why is nerfing a boss a bad thing? And what could it possibly do to make it way less fun and engaging, at least in my opinion, right? So for me, I don't like boss health nerfs because of how they're implemented, and I have a couple examples here that I'll show, but I want to talk about these graphs first. This is going to be these graphs are specifically about Fyrakk. I do have a Tendril example, but this is mostly about Fyrakk. We're currently, when the boss initially was announced, and before the 10% health nerf, this is what we are looking at, right? We're looking at doing 30% of the boss's health when the boss is at 100% health. Now, with the nerf to the boss, we are now sitting here, where we are actually doing 27% of what was previously this boss health. I mean, my math might be slightly skewed, and the visuals are probably a little skewed as well. But essentially, now we have to do less damage to get to that 70% threshold, meaning we come into a situation where now, at least in my guild, where I'll show, we have to stop damage, right? And this is what I would like to see instead when we talk about boss health nerfs. When you nerf the health of the boss, I think its corresponding phasing should be readjusted with it, right? I think that Fyrakk should start phasing at 67% instead of its current 70%, because that still retains the feel and flow and timings of the fight while also nerfing the overall fight. However, I've talked to some other people and I have gotten differing opinions on this. So I want to talk about that as well, which is these boss nerfs, when they do health nerfs like this, are not meant for players like me or the guild I'm in or that kind of thing. They aren't meant for us. So we aren't the consideration for these kinds of nerfs. Because let's say there's a guild that's at Mythic Fyrakk, but Mythic guilds have a very wide spectrum of who is in them, how good they are, how efficient every person is at playing their class, right? There's a very wide spectrum to Mythic guilds, including cutting-edge guilds. So these nerfs are not meant for us, they're meant for players who are not essentially playing as well as we are, right? And that's totally fine. I don't want to look down on or say, oh, these are for shittier players, because that's dumb to do, right? Nobody wants to talk like that or talk about other people like that. But what this realistically does is help them get to this 70% threshold while reducing the amount of overall damage they need to do to the boss, so they're less efficient players, or even they could have a less efficient raid composition, so they can actually kill these bosses without having everything stacked in their favor like the initial design was intended. Every raid buff, like what if you don't have a hunter buff? That's a negative 5% damage from the 80% threshold down if you somehow don't have a hunter. What if you don't have a demon hunter, right? These nerfs are probably more tuned towards people who might have compositional issues like that, where they don't have the luxury of being, no, we need demon hunter here, this buff, this buff, this buff, this buff, the whole raid buff problem that people keep talking about. But I personally, this is more of a personal opinion, where this could certainly be the case and certainly be more beneficial to the player base as a whole, more so than me just being opinionated and essentially not wanting to stop DPS. That's really what it is. I don't want to stop hitting the boss. If I want to play a fight and I'm fighting somebody, I want to hit the boss. There are situations, and there have been situations in the past of different raid tiers where not doing damage is the optimal play. Especially looking at like Stone Legion gem rolls with how spell queuing literally ruined that fight, where if you didn't push at specific timings, you could end up just eating yourself, even though you're not technically hitting the boss during the fight. So it's more of a situation of players overcoming that. And now I want to bring up an example from Tendril as to why I don't like boss health nerfs. So here from Tendril, this is from a heroic kill that we did. This is just our heroic clear. So whatever, we're doing a heroic sale. Why does it do that? But for us, here's something you notice. The boss will cast Flaming Germination. And what this does is it puts a debuff on you for 15 seconds that's supposed to last the duration of everybody picking up their seeds. It's raid-wide damage as it goes into the next thing. Tendril received an additional 10% health nerf this week, and this almost happened to us on our mythic, on our mythic kill. I have heard that people that are currently doing mythic sales of Tendril and Fyrakk, etc., I have heard that those people are actually, with these changes, right? So like this change to Fyrakk, this actually means they don't have to stop DPS, even though they're technically a player down, so it's kind of beneficial for them, and it's good for them, right? But this is an example where something like a Boss Health Nerf can go extremely wrong and potentially kill your entire raid. This is from Heroic. So the boss, literally, the timing couldn't be worse. The boss starts the cast of Flaming Germination, finishes it, it instantly transitions into the fly phase. We will not get the seeds, however, we will have the dot on us. So everybody is set up to go into the air. We're also taking damage from the blowback, but you can see our entire raid is ticking down. If this was Mythic, our entire raid would be dead. And to counteract this, if we did push this on Mythic, right? If we pushed at that point on Mythic, that means that we would all have to plant and then heal up before being able to move to the third platform. But if we do that, we do not get to the third platform in time. He starts casting Supernova while we're in the air, and we all die anyway. This is an example, quite niche, however, that could lead to us, or could lead to players having to change their entire strategy of a boss fight, or holding DPS if they're actually optimized and playing well, to avoid a scenario where their good play wipes them as a raid. We actually had somewhat of a fix for this. When we eventually did our mythic kill, what we were doing is lusting the second shield for P2. So, or the first shield, after we did the first flying phase, we were lusting that. So to not reduce the boss health too much, we were now lusting this shield phase on the third set. So that changing that did allow us to not get that 40% overlap. However, we even had multiple deaths, and we're still very close to getting that 40% overlap with moving our lust timing. So with better play, we could essentially have killed our entire raid, which would have led to having to stop DPS and just sit there and wait for the mechanics to go off. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to actually do the fight. We would have just killed ourselves. So something like this is where I go back to this graph, right? What I would have personally liked to see with a change like this is with Tendril's health getting nerfed, Tendril transitions at the 40% mark regardless, right? So what they should have done is, this is 60% of the boss's health into the phase. So they should have changed it, so now Tendril at 34% is when he is hard-coded to transition in the phase. That way you don't have to change you essentially don't have to change what you're doing, and you're still killing the boss just as efficiently. It is just now easier, and this goes towards not having to change around your strategy or what you're doing. Because what ended up happening to us after we saw this 10% health on Fyrakk nerf was we started wiping to the second intermission, or actually to the first intermission, multiple times, because our timing was off and our rogues, who did most of our shield damage, didn't have all of their cooldowns up to just blast it, because they're getting ebb and mighted. They're getting the juice, right? Our rogues are getting the juice because sub-rogues are insane in raid right now. So because of this, it actually ended up causing way more problems with a health nerf. Now, like I said before, these nerfs and these changes may have been not us as the intended audience. These changes may have been for other guilds to be able to do these bosses later on and get later cutting edge tiers, right? Which I think is totally fine. And as my opinion of what I would like them to change with how they change the percent phase transitions on these bosses could be wrong. My opinion and my take could be completely wrong on this, because I am certainly biased when it comes to why they would make these changes. Because when I see these, which is why I asked other people, I think, oh, me, how does it affect me? What does this change for me? Because it goes into now our Fyrakk kill, right? What ends up happening with us is now we're going into the second Dream Rend, and from here, from this second Dream Rend into this frontal cast, we're essentially not supposed to do very much damage to the boss or almost anything to the boss. I'll hit it with a couple Mortal Strikes to try and build more fatality stacks for the last phase. But realistically, all we're doing here is for the next 25 seconds, we're not allowed to touch the boss. The boss health barely moves at all. And we're just waiting, right? We're waiting for the transition. We're waiting for the frontal. And that's because we're trying to play the boss better by then, if the boss is in a cast like this, if you push him below the 70% mark as he's casting, now you get the entire initial cast of Firestorm into the overall cast of the Firestorm to milk damage into the boss for the next phase. So now we phase him at about 68, 69%. So we get an extra, actually, I mean, we die here, otherwise it probably would have been around 67%. I don't know what the fuck happened. But essentially, with this change, we wouldn't have had to stop DPS the entire duration, and then could have phased naturally where we wanted to, while the boss was already going to be at that lower percentage anyway. If we wanted to min-max it even further from that, we probably could have picked an ability to... excuse me. We probably could have picked an ability to actually focus down, and with our DPS, with how we do the boss, we might have still been able to transition at that Firestorm cast previously, because what we do earlier in the fight is for the first plate for the first cast here, our tanks drag the boss into the Raging Flames, so we're trying to drag it away from the melee to naturally lessen the amount of damage the boss is taking. So instead of this, with that change, where we could have changed the boss's health to 67% on the transition instead, if we barely pull the boss out, all the melee keep their uptime, we can actually play the strategy that we wanted to, instead of having to hold DPS the whole time and have a naturally set up phase transition, meaning we're not really playing phase 1 anymore. We're waiting for phase 1 so our rogues get all of their 2-minute cooldowns back. Excuse me. And then we try and milk the boss as much as possible rather than just play the boss. There have probably been such cases with other bosses and other tiers. I only really did... I got Cutting Edge in Nathria, and then I didn't play the rest of the expansion. And then I've been playing all of this expansion. But I really don't like essentially having to do this DPS stop because of a nerf, and I think something like this could alleviate that. Where we're actually still getting the boss down the health that we need to, but we're still able to push. Because we're not even optimal in this phase. We could pull him, we could keep him closer, we could have all of our DPS still doing damage to him on the movement of the second Dream Rend. But this also has a different side effect, where there has now been a new strategy that people have been attempting, which I don't know if we're going to attempt yet. It's kind of up in the air with what we want to do. But essentially, you can skip this second Dream Rend by pushing the boss to 70%. And this is it's more of a parse method, but you can push this boss by the second Dream Rend, and if we actually were doing damage, had all the uptime on the first Dream Rend, etc., this new strategy has been developed to push before the boss even does this Dream Rend. What that does is it changes the cooldowns, it changes the timers, it changes pretty much everything else you're doing in the fight. Because if we push this second Dream Rend, normally I'm holding cooldowns as a warrior for the shield phase. My cooldowns are already up. So from here to the second Firestorms, I'm holding my cooldowns for roughly about a third of their cooldown, like about 30-40 seconds, before I get to use them again. With this strategy, I would just get to use them again pretty quickly, right? So I do think that there is a plus and a minus to these health changes, where you can make new strategies like this, and having a new strat and then having a new way to do this boss can be pretty fun, right? You can kind of reprog it a little bit. Oh, we can adjust this, we can adjust this, we can change this here. It gives you new problems to solve, which I think can be fun and interesting if your raid group is interested in that. Which my raid group is interested in that, and they're talking about trying to set up how we want to do a second Dream Rain push for next week, which will be interesting to see. But I just personally don't like how they've implemented Boss Health Nerfs, especially when you consider timed percentage-based phasing. I think if they want to implement these changes, or these phase nerfs, that they should probably also just nerf the amount of, nerf the percentage of the phase, because that still nerfs it for everybody. But just to wrap it up, once again, I probably said this 3 times by now, at least, I might not be the target audience for these kinds of changes. This change might be for a guild that just simply does not have the optimized damage that any other higher guilds might, right? They just simply might not have it. So them changing this will allow them to do the fight like normal without having to have like every raid buff, as an example. But that's just kind of my whole take on it. It's kind of been brewing in my brain for a little bit, and it's honestly mainly been brewing in my brain since every single pull I have to essentially AFK for 40 seconds every pull. So I got to do something with those 40 seconds, and I might as well think about complaining about World of Warcraft, right? Anyway, yeah, that's all I got to say. I'm curious on your takes. I definitely, if you think I'm wrong, let me know. I'd be very curious to see. And because I could very well be wrong, like I said, might not be the target audience for these changes. But thank you for your time. I hope you have a good one. And that's all I want to say. Peace.